Well, welcome everyone. We're going to get started so we have enough time to complete our webinar. My name is Lori Prince. I'm the Director of Parent and Family Engagement. I'm excited to invite you here to hear from some of our campus experts on academic advising. We know folks submitted some of their questions prior to joining us today, and our team will hopefully try to answer those as part of their presentation. But I also wanted to alert folks that if you'd like to ask questions as we're doing this webinar, please use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen and put your questions there, and we'll try to get to them after the presentation starts or gets wrapped up. I'm going to start by introducing you to our Senior Director of University Advising, Dr. Molly Cullen. I'm going to ask Molly to take it away. Thanks, Molly.
Thank you, Lori. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar today. As Lori said, I'm Dr. Molly Cullen, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Director for University Advising. And I brought a couple of guests along who are the actual experts on advising at Seattle U, and I'm going to let Natasha and then Kristen introduce themselves as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Natasha Maliak. I'm a senior academic advisor with the Academic Pathways Advising Office, and my primary area of advising is helping to support our undeclared students before they eventually move into a major that they will hopefully graduate in. And I will pass it on to Kristen.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Dawn Urban, use she, her pronouns, and I'm an academic advisor within the College of Arts and Sciences.
Thank you, Kristen and Natasha. I'm going to just quickly share my screen so that you can kind of see our PowerPoint today. And then we will make this PowerPoint available in the chat at the end of our conversation today. So any of the links that you see us have on here, you'll be able to utilize when we'll send you a quick PDF of the PowerPoint at the end of our presentation. So let's get started. Quick agenda for what we're going to cover today is I'm going to give kind of an overview of academic advising at Seattle U, what some of the student expectations are for academic advising. Natasha is going to walk you through how students will prepare to register, because that is coming up soon in November, so that you'll have some awareness of what they're looking at in their systems for how to get registered for courses for winter quarter. Kristen is going to talk about some of the other reasons that students might come to an academic advisor. And then we'll kind of circle back with how parents and supporters can support the advising process. And then we will leave hopefully plenty of time at the end for questions. So academic advising at Seattle University, we really try to focus on the student experience of advising and keep students at the center of the work that we do. Our goals in academic advising are really to keep accurate information about degree programs, course registration processes, and academic policy, use strategic course planning that ensures on-time degree completion, reminders and clear instructions on important tasks and dates for continuing at the university, using holistic guidance that connects academic programs with students' individual career and life goals. We have a compassionate space that communicates belonging to students. We are a known resource for referring students to other resources around campus, such as disability services, food and housing resources, counseling, learning assistance, things like that. And then we are a mechanism for early response to potential barriers to students persisting and graduating from the university. Students will have either a professional or faculty advisor or both. The difference is basically that professional advisors are staff. They are primary role advisors. They work with larger caseloads of students, and they are available to students for questions and things kind of full-time as their primary role. They The primary role advisors tend to work in the advising centers themselves, and you'll see on the slide there's the locations of each of the advising centers, with the exception of nursing, because the advisors are kind of scattered around Garant Hall, but they're all in there, and you can check in and find them pretty easily through their main office. So primary role advisors work in the advising centers, and in each of the schools or colleges, you'll see the variance between faculty versus professional advisors is distinct from college to college. So for example, in the College of Arts and Sciences, all students are assigned both a professional advisor and a faculty advisor for all 4 years, but their primary advisor is their professional advisor for their first 2 years and their faculty advisor for their second 2 years. Science and engineering, on the other hand, will move students into working with faculty advisors as quickly as possible, some in that first term once they've declared, and the professional advisors are working more with the pre-science and pre-engineering and computer science students who have not yet met key benchmarks to move fully into faculty advising. Albers School of Business and Economics only has professional advisors, and they do not have faculty advising. College of Nursing divides between first 2 years and second 2 years. And then, of course, our academic pathways advising, working with undeclared students, are all working with the professional advisors in APA. The main difference between whether a student has a faculty advisor or a professional advisor, they have the same opportunities to meet with their advisor, to get advice on coursework, and their programs and things like that. And in the advising centers, even students who have a primary faculty advisor can still go into the advising centers if they're having trouble getting a hold of their faculty member for whatever reason, or if it's summer and the faculty is not in office. The advising centers will work with all students, regardless of who their primary advisor is. The student expectations in advising is also kind of distinct from school to school. We will be working over the course of this next year to bring those into greater alignment to make it easier for students to understand their requirements. But I would say the primary advice that we would give to students now is to be paying attention to the outreach they're receiving from their advisor and from their advising center in their school or college. They are being given the information they need to know what they need to do for registration, for example. All students in their first 3 terms, regardless of their school or college, are required to have an education plan approved prior to registration, just so that we have that opportunity to make sure they understand the parameters of their program, they have a plan in place for what they want to do in the next term, and really give all students a solid footing in terms of getting started and not missing key prerequisites and things like that they'll need later on. So for your students being in their first term, pretty universally, they're going to need to be connecting with their academic advisor in these next 4 weeks in order to be ready to register the week of November 14th. Natasha, I'm going to pass it over to you to start talking about how they will get ready for registration.
Sounds good. Okay, so in terms of registration, so when students log into their My Seattle U student planning, in order to search for classes, the search bar is actually located just on the right-hand side of their student planning page. And so in order to actually search for classes, you'll need to make sure that you know the acronym for the class that you'd like to register for. And it does help to also know the course number. If you don't, no worries. You can also use filters on the left-hand side, as you can see from the screenshots, to filter for the term. And so when students select a class, in this case, the example is Kinesiology 2100, students will also select the term which would, for the upcoming term, 2024 winter quarter, would ensure that the course that they are adding is entered in for the correct quarter. Now on the next slide, when a student is searching for classes, I think the slides got flipped around, I apologize. So for the class that they are searching, just on the next slide, you'll be able to see, you can enter in the course number and name. So that is really helpful to be able to add your classes in and to be able to plan out your schedule that way. On the next slide, when you click on the plan and schedule button, and you actually have added your class to your schedule, in this case, you can see this is an example of what the fall quarter schedule would look like for the student view. And so in this case, you can see the classes that were added to the course plan just on the left-hand side in that box. In this case, this is a nursing class. And then you can also see the weekly schedule and how the class, what I would refer to as like populates on that weekly schedule. So you can see the particular section. Some classes will have more than one section available. And so students will be able to see maybe a preferred day and time of the week that they'd like to plan their classes for. Something to also consider is that some classes might only have one section. So because of that, that means that other classes a student might look at would have to revolve around that one particular section of a class if that class is highly preferred for your student. So I always encourage students to check their schedule, the weekly schedule, after adding the course to their course plan. And just be aware that if you are looking at classes with multiple class offerings, there could be multiple pages in which there could be more than one page of a class being offered with a different section, day and time. So if it looks like the first page is full, make sure you check and see if there's a second, third, or subsequent page. For our next slide, I just wanted to talk about the timeline tab, which is that second tab just after you look at the weekly schedule. So this tab is really helpful because you can actually see in this screenshot here the number of enrolled classes that you're taking. So that's really important, especially if you want to be between 12 credits to 18 credits, 12 being the minimum number of credits we consider students to be for full-time status, 18 being the maximum that typically students are allowed to enroll in. This view is also really helpful for a long-term plan if you want to plan further out than just the upcoming quarter. And you can also see GPA or cumulative grade point average information as well, or term grade point average information if you want to check and see how you did for each quarter. Letter grades are also posted at the end of each quarter in the timeline as well. And then on our next slide, in order to figure out who your academic advisor is or who your student's academic advisor is, you'll click on that third tab, which says Enable Registration. And so as you can see in this example, this particular student has both a faculty advisor in kinesiology and a department advisor in kinesiology. And so your student will be able to differentiate who is who. In terms of submitting the plan to the advisor, so per the slide that Molly had previously shown, where a course plan has to be approved, this is also the same location where a student would submit their plan to their advisor. So if the student has courses in mind that they'd like their academic advisor or faculty advisor to review, they can just hit the submit plan button. So that way their advisor can review their course plan and approve it or follow up and contact them about any changes that need to be made. And then our final slide. So in terms of contacting your academic advising office, I do want to share a link that could be helpful. So for anyone that is interested in figuring out how to contact your individual advising center, the link that I have shared is the one that's shown in the screenshot. So you can definitely contact the individual advising centers if you have any further or specific questions about registration. And then in terms of the process of actually registering, I also wanted to share the link to our support videos as well. So that way, if you do have questions about how to add courses to a course plan or how to register or anything like that, that support video link, which is the second one that I've shared in the chat, could also be helpful. And I will pass it on to Kristen.
Thank you, Natasha. All right, howdy, howdy. So beyond educational planning and regarding registration and class scheduling, which does take up a good amount of our time, especially during Add Drop and Reg Week, there are quite a few number of things that we can also discuss with your student, and that students do come to us for help as first years, second years, and all the way like up until they're seniors. Students are talking to us about these things. So just generally, we can discuss majors and minors. So maybe not only the requirements of their current major, but also if they're considering changing, adding on a different major. So talking about how realistic that is, how it fits into their end goals. And then also maybe even planning out using that timeline feature that Natasha used. We could potentially plan out their whole time at SU and how that would look with maybe 2 majors or a minor. And then we can also talk about transfer credits. So maybe that is specifically about transferring a course in from maybe a different institution. Sometimes, especially if a student has a lot of, let's say, like math or science prereqs, students will maybe take a class at a community college over the summer and then transfer it in. So we just talk about like the pros and cons of maybe taking a transfer class, and then the process, like the form process related to that. And then of course, there's also the AP IB credits that a student may have, which we don't really exactly touch on. That is a little bit more like admissions based, but sometimes you do meet the odd student who's like, oh yeah, I took the AP exam like 2 years ago, like, does that help? And it's like, yes, that does help. Like, so we can talk about how that can maybe apply to their major. And then we also can talk through policies and forms. So policies are really important, obviously, for your student to be successful and make sure that they are hitting all of the requirements, and also abiding by like the senior residency policy. And so we just make sure that everything is in alignment. And then also if there's forms, such as maybe a transfer verification request form or a change major form, or a petition, we can either help the student out to actually complete the form, or we can simply be like, hey, this is the form you need to do, you know, this is it. But we're definitely like a point person and the good contact to be like, this is what you should do. And then of course, academic supporting. So again, I think I mentioned already about like connecting to goals, like end goals outside of college. So we can really connect like, okay, well, if you know, want to be a psychiatrist, like these are the type of classes you should take. These are like the faculty you should maybe talk to, like, you know, connect you with career engagement or with our internship coordinator. So really like think about how their academics can help the student out. And then also if they're having some type of academic challenge, whether that's maybe they're struggling in the class, we can help navigate, maybe refer them to learning assistance program with work study or with group study, or tutoring, or maybe encouraging them to talk with the professor. Or if it's a little bit more challenging than that, then we can also talk through that process. And of course, starting the conversation about studying abroad is really good with your advisor. So I actually do advise for international studies where students do study abroad very often as it's required in the major. And it's a really good place to have that first initial conversation. And it's a really good idea to have that conversation early on, and to see like, how doable is it within your 2 majors and 1 minor? So that's a really good place to have that conversation. And of course, talk about career discernment, professional development, and also campus resources. And now I'm gonna leave it over to Molly.
Thanks, Kristen. I think one of the the really important areas to understand, academic advisors are a really great kind of first point of contact for really any questions around campus. Students get to know their advisor. They know how to get a hold of their advisor, but advisors are not counselors. We're not experts in all things. And so advisors work really hard to refer our students to the appropriate places around campus and connect them with other resources, whether that's the Office of Disability Services, the Counseling and Psychological Services Office, the Mosaic Center, which works with students of a variety of diverse backgrounds, campus ministry, learning assistance, as Kristen mentioned, and career engagement, as well as the Office of Student Persistence. So we work really collectively and collaboratively with our colleagues around campus to ensure that students have access to the resources that are going to help them be successful both academically and personally at the university. The next piece we wanted to talk about is really the parent role in advising, which is different than maybe it was when your students were in high school or earlier. In that, we look to partner with parents, but we always want to have the student at the center of the conversation. So as advisors, it's always our preference to work directly with students, and that parents can be a part of that conversation to some extent. But we really do want to focus our attention on the students themselves. But as parents, there's lots of ways that you can support the work that we're doing. First is just to ask questions and be curious about what your student is learning and experiencing. Ask questions about their plans and what they're tracking in terms of their major, where they want to go with it, things like that. Those are all great conversations for you to have with your student. It's helpful if you're aware of the academic calendar. And then by academic calendar, I mean, when is the last day that students can change their schedules before they're set for the quarter? When is registration? When do students need to have their education plan done prior to registration? Having those reminders about key deadlines, and the academic calendar is right there on the university website that you can access. So, kind of helping with those reminders is always helpful. Parents and supporters can really encourage a proactive approach to advising. We absolutely love it when students come in prepared for their conversations with us. If they have actual questions they want to have answered, if they're curious about how a major or a minor might impact their four-year plan. We are only as helpful as the opportunities we're given to engage with students. And, I think it's an important reminder that the professional advisors especially are in their offices or on their online, every day, Monday through Friday. And so it doesn't have to be just around registration that students come in and talk with us. They could be curious about internship opportunities. They can be curious about potential minors or major changes. And those conversations can happen at any point. They can come in the first week of classes. They could come in during finals week and talk with an advisor about what's been on their mind in terms of their education. I think that students who really are proactive in how they approach what they want to get out of their time at Seattle University are the ones who get the most out of their time at Seattle University. And academic advisors can be a key partner in envisioning those pieces. And the last thing I'll say is just to really help students dream. Everyone is worried about students finding the right job after college. But students with vision and ideas are the ones who find a real vocation out of their education. And it's not just about having the job with the salary, but it's about having the meaningful work that will augment their life. And so as advisors, we want to support students in envisioning the work that is going to be meaningful to them, as well as the job that is going to, help them pay for school, as we say. And then lastly, I do want to also point out, and we will have time for questions for you. But it's important for parents and supporters to understand the regulations around FERPA, which is the federal law that limits what we can tell you about your student's experience at the university. That similar to HIPAA in kind of the health industry, FERPA is there to protect the privacy of students. And so there's a link here, and again, we'll put the PowerPoint in the chat for you to keep these links and use them. But your student can fill out a release of information, which would give us more leeway to talk with you about their academic experience on campus. But we will still have some limitations. Without that release of information, we really can't give any more than like directory information. And so if you are interested in knowing about your students' grades, GPA, who their advisor is, what classes they're enrolled in, their academic standing, what majors they have, your student will need to fill out that release of information, and it is their right to do so or not. And we will check to see that release of information exists before we will talk to any parents or supporters. And even with the release of information, we will always want students to be in the conversation so that I know when I was advising full-time, I always wanted the student to also be on the phone, or always want the student to be in the room for the meeting, because we really want to be empowering students to take ownership of their education. So we will kind of always seek to have that student link in that triangle conversation. So if you're interested in engaging in conversations with academic advisors for any reason, please be sure that you're understanding the regulations that limit what we can talk to you about, but also have that release of information signed by your student before we can proceed in those conversations. So that's an important detail. Otherwise, we're only ever going to be able to talk in generalities. So with that, I want to kind of pass it back to you, the audience, to see what questions you have. I see that there are a few in the chat already, so I'm going to stop my share and we'll see what those questions look like. So we have one question. It looks like Natasha was already answering that. But if a student is in the pre-major program and thinks they might be interested in a particular major, do they switch out? Oh, you just made it disappear, Natasha. So do they switch out from a pre-major program advisor as soon as they declare? What happens if it ends up not what the student wanted? So Natasha, do you want to maybe answer that more broadly for the entire call?
Yes, for sure. So when a student switches out of the Academic Pathways Advising Program, which was formerly the Pre-Major Studies Program, we recently went through a name change. So I'm trying to reduce any confusion any parents may have regarding Pre-Major Studies Program and Academic Pathways Advising. Academic Pathways Advising, or APA, is our newly branded program. But when a student changes from being an APA student into their new major, they will be assigned a new academic advisor, and their new academic advisor will be able to guide them through their degree and program planning and to be able to explain their requirements towards graduation. So I usually try to explain to students once they've completed their form, it's usually an electronic form to change their major, that they will be assigned a new academic advisor. But in the meantime, during that period, while they wait for the form to process, I will still be their academic advisor. So if they do have any questions, they can still reach out to me until they eventually switch over to their new advisor.
Also a question in the regular chat from April. My daughter has been getting conflicting information regarding whether she qualifies for early enrollment. Disability office said yes, primary advisor said no. How do we clarify this? So this is a pretty specific question, but generally speaking, if the disability services has confirmation that the priority registration is in place, is actually active, then disability services is correct. However, I do know it does take some time for the accommodation to actually be in place. So at this point, I wonder if it's more just a work in progress or if it hasn't actually been in place yet. But there's a really easy way to tell. You can go on to, or your student can go on to My Seattle U, and then on the winter quarter page, they will actually register for classes. It will indicate in blue of when the registration time is, and priority registration time for winter quarter is November 14th. So if your daughter has November 14th as their registration day, then yes, they do have priority registration. But if it's the 15th, 16th, or probably 17th, if they're a first year, then no, it's not yet in place.
I'm going to ask one of all of you, if I could you maybe address closed classes? If a student hits a closed class situation, what's the process for them related to that?
I don't mind going first. So for closed classes or waitlisted classes, so if your student encounters a situation where they see a class, it is completely full, they cannot register themselves into it, depending on the class, it could go a few ways. So the first is that if there is an option to join a wait list, we strongly encourage students to join the wait list for that class, and also monitor their schedule, but also their email to see if the department reaches out to them about their status on the wait list. The other option is that if there is no wait list option, we recommend that students contact their academic advisor, because within the colleges, there are slightly different waitlist procedures. So for example, our business school, they will actually have a form on their website that actually will provide closed class procedure information. And that form is only available during registration week typically, and sometimes it may be available going into the week after registration. And so I don't know if Kristen or Molly, if you're able to put the Albers waitlist link in the chat, that would be helpful. And then the other one is for arts and sciences. There is a PDF document with closed class procedures. Kristen, if you're able to put that link in the chat, that would be great. And then for our core classes, we strongly encourage students to actually contact your academic advisor directly, because we'll be able to take a look and see how full those classes are and if there's any option for the student to be added to it. And for science and engineering, they use a waitlist information science and engineering form. And so that form is reviewed by the departments. But again, it is slightly nuanced, because with science and engineering, thank you for putting that in, Kristen. For science and engineering, some of the departments actually prefer that you contact the senior admin or department office directly to be added. Now, I realize this is all confusing and this is a lot of information regarding waitlist closed class procedures, but my hope is that with the links that I will also add into the chat, students have that information. So if they do come across a class where they're waitlisted or it's closed, they have an idea as to what those procedures are going to be if they can't add themselves to a waitlist on My Seattle U.
Thanks, Natasha. Another question I frequently get from family members is only 3 classes. If they maybe have students at a semester school or know of other folks, could one of you chat a bit about that for in our context?
Yeah, I can go ahead and take that. So 3 classes, yeah, it doesn't seem like that much, but that's when you're on a semester system. On a quarter system, it does move really fast. And 3 courses is considered a full course load. It's right in that sweet spot of the 12 to 18 credits being full-time. And it's a demanding load, and you should be able to complete most majors taking only 3 classes a quarter, without having a credit overload, without having any transfer courses in. It's manageable with most majors. Of course, there are some majors where maybe there's a lab that's 2 credits and then the lecture is 4. So then maybe you have 16 credits. So it's kind of like you have 3 classes plus a lab. So it really does vary like that. But overall, 3 classes is considered a pretty typical and hefty course load anyways.
Great, thanks, Chris. Could one of you answer live the latest question in the Q&A?
Let's see, what is that question? Are there recommendations for the timeline of UCOR requirements, no matter what their major, and especially the freshman seminar? My daughter couldn't get into the seminar in Q1, and I think she doesn't have it planned for Q2. She's already had her advising appointment. Is that okay?
I can go ahead and tackle that. It does kind of depend on the student's major, but for the most part, yes, that's okay. So ideally, okay, let me back up. There are 12 UCOR classes that a student will complete. And since this is a liberal arts school, we want those courses to be completed throughout maybe the entire academic career, at least all the way through junior year. So there's no like mad rush to get UCORs done with. Of course, it is ideal to take 1 UCOR a quarter your first year, just because some students may not yet be in their major classes yet, and also the classes won't be quite as challenging as freshmen. So it is nice to focus on UCOR classes at that time. But if your student hasn't been in a UCOR for fall and it seems like they're not having it be planned for winter quarter, it would be okay. Me personally, I would feel more comfortable if they had a UCOR in their winter quarter, but they should be fine. It does depend a little bit on the major. I hope that answers your question, Natasha or Molly, if you want to add on to that.
I think I'll add to that a little bit too, just generally speaking. The university core, as Kristen said, is designed to be kind of peppered throughout a student's 4 years. And there are kind of some upper level core that they'll get to later on. And it's really there for 2 reasons. One is we want our students to graduate from the university as fully formed humans with an awareness of the world outside of themselves and empathy and a thoughtfulness. And so even if they're an economics major or a nursing major or a computer science major, we want all students from the university to kind of go out into the world as thoughtful citizens of the global community. And I think that, there's always kind of a pressure to kind of get the core done. But realistically, if you're a computer science major, those upper division courses are going to start getting tricky and tough and be very analytical. And wouldn't it be nice to just have a random art history class where your brain can do something else for a while that quarter? And so I always encourage students to kind of spread the core out a little bit, so that they're always being able to kind of thoughtfully engage in the different topics that they have available to them. But I would say getting started on the core is important, but there's no race to finish the core, with the exception of perhaps, nursing students who, once they're into their clinicals and things like that, they might have more demands on their time. But that's all fairly well laid out by the nursing program.
Great, thank you both. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. If anyone has a last question here, please type it in there. And I know Molly has sent me the webinar PowerPoint and some helpful tips that I will email out to everyone. We can't seem to get it to attach in the chat, but I will make sure you get that information. right. Well, thank you, Molly, Natasha, and Kristen for sharing your expertise today. Academic advising is a really critical piece of the student experience. And family members, now you know some of those resources available to your student. Please encourage them to take full advantage of them. They're important in their ability to really progress through Seattle U. We have our advising period coming up, so it's very, very timely to get them to be making those appointments with their academic advisor if they have not already. Alrighty. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.